Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. I'm kind of embarrassed to say I fell for a minor scam. Not necessarily a scam, but a marketing ploy. What had happened is one of my favorite silicone molds, which I use to pour that. This is the mold that I'm using. I'm just about to buy what's going to be my fourth one. Each one of these lasts like 15, 20 pours, so it's pretty good. I actually figured out how to get it to last longer. What you have to do is dry them out completely. What I do is I take a large sealable plastic bag, put the mold in there, and put a container of calcium chloride salt to absorb all the humidity out of the mold before it turns out a whole lot better that way too. If you look at the back of the mold, there's a lot less bubbling out of it. But you got to dry it out for at least 24 hours. And then you can, the next day you could do maybe 3 or 4 pours before you have to repeat that process. But other than that, the mold does pretty well. I was a little bit unsure if it would take lead. Lead has a higher melting point than bismuth. Bismuth melts at 270 Celsius. I can't remember what lead melts at, but I knew it was a little bit higher. Lead melting point is 327 degrees, so almost 60 degrees Celsius higher than bismuth. So I decided to try it. I had one mold that was toward the end of its life anyway, and I thought for the last pour I'll do lead to see what happened. It turned out really well. I kind of regretted I didn't use a better mold for that, because now I have to remelt that whole thing along with all the precautions that it takes to work with lead. And then I realized I got scammed the last time I was buying that silicone mold. What had happened was this guy lists the thing multiple times for good reason, because he's probably shooting for different audiences, right? So he has one for $39.89, $39.95, $46.50, and whatever. And then I realized the last time I bought it, I think I paid $46.50. So he's basically, in economics terms, what he's doing is riding down the demand curve, right? You got a demand curve. Let's see if we can pull up a typical demand curve. Your typical demand curve is going to look like this, right? At a certain price, right, some number of people are going to buy. As the price goes down, more people are going to buy, right? And there's also a supply curve, obviously, right? And let's pretend that this is the supply and demand curve, and this would be the price. Now, each one of these points is somebody willing to pay a certain amount, right? So in this market, I'm right here, right? And what he's hoping is that I'll pay this price instead of this price. And thus he lists the item in multiple places. Or he's hoping that my time's too valuable to go to page 2 of the eBay listing, right? Either way, right? I mean, I'm guilty of that too, right? I do tutoring, and sometimes before giving out a quote, I like to somehow interview the clients a little bit to get more information than they were, or better yet, when I'm selling the final product for the art, right? Right now, I got a buyer who's a chemistry buff, and he wants some different metal samples, and he's religious items is something that he likes too. And thus my recent interest in pouring these other metals. I'm not sure if anybody can provide some guidance. Now that I have one of these molds that's basically done with anyway, I'll probably try pouring other metals in there just to see how well it holds up, right? I might give zinc a try. Silicone generally isn't going to hold zinc. But since I got one that's already done with anyway, I'll give it a try just to see what happens. Eventually, I hope to do some of the not so safe metals, especially cadmium and thallium. I think cadmium has a good chance of not damaging silicone because its melting point is, let's see, 321, just below that of lead. Although I'll have to get all suited up again to do that. That was the trickiest part of doing the lead, actually. Lead was actually quite easier to work with compared to bismuth because it shrinks when it freezes and it doesn't create that bulging out, right? Part of the tricky part of doing bismuth is getting it to, well, for this one it's not so bad, but if you have something you want to stand, like the mold for this one looks like that, so then you got to sand down, and I definitely don't want to be sanding lead anytime soon. But I hope to I hope to work with some of the more exotic elements on there. We pull out the periodic table. Let's see which ones I've done so far. Indium, tin, antimony. I haven't done tellurium yet. The reason I haven't done tellurium isn't necessarily I'm afraid of it. I just don't want to create a ton of losses because all of these metals are really precious. And judging from watching videos online from melting tellurium, a bunch of it oxidizes. That would just break my heart. So I want to read more about it. I finally read more about indium, and I was able to do it without visible loss. So using a graphite crucible and graphite molds, I wouldn't want to be pouring indium into a silicone just yet because it looks like it could get tricky in terms of the losses. But I had great success with indium. I would imagine thallium would be very similar, except for the fact that it's a lot more toxic, right? Cadmium would probably be very similar to some of these. Some people almost consider the zinc family to be a post-transition. Some people even call the copper family to be a post-transition. Obviously, much higher melting points there. I briefly thought about lithium earlier this week because I had just replaced the battery in my laptop. And I wanted to open the old battery to get the lithium metal out of there. I've seen videos of people doing it. Obviously, I wouldn't sell that stuff at my art show. But it'd be nice to pour something and take a look at it just before it completely tarnishes and explodes, right? Anyway, I fell for a minor scam, and I can laugh about it now. This is the Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum. The Peter Dislike Show. Bum 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 bum.